I realized something was wrong the moment the man on the phone called me by a name I hadn't used in 52 years. "Miss Whitford," he said brightly, as if speaking to a young bride instead of a 74-year-old woman still groggy from anesthesia. "We're pleased to confirm the sale of your wedding rings. Exquisite pieces. The buyer is thrilled." For a second, I thought he had dialed the wrong number. Then my stomach turned, cold and slow, because he said, "Eleanor Whitford again, my maiden name, the one tied to a girl who hadn't yet lived a whole marriage, a widowhood, and the hard, quiet years after." I gripped the side of the kitchen counter to steady myself. My rings. Sold. And by me, apparently, while I was still sedated after surgery, barely able to speak my own name, let alone sign it. I asked him to repeat himself, though I'd heard every word the first time. He sounded cheerful, oblivious to the way my breathing changed. He described the rings in detail. The modest gold band I'd chosen with my husband because it felt sturdy and honest. The engagement ring with the shy little diamond he'd saved for. My throat tightened. He talked about certificates, signatures, the paperwork I had submitted, and I felt something inside me tilt, like a shelf coming loose from the wall. "I didn't authorize any sale," I finally managed. My voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded like someone standing at the far end of a tunnel. There was a pause, then the rustling of pages. "But we have your signature, Miss Whitford." And the identification documents matched. The driver's license and notarized form listed your maiden name. "If there's been an error, we'll investigate, but—" His tone suggested there was no error. They'd seen proof. Proof I apparently provided. When I hung up, I stood still for a long time. The clock on the stove ticked loudly, each second slicing the silence. Something unnatural crept into me. Not panic, not yet, but the realization that someone had moved through my life while I was unconscious, like a stranger walking through your bedroom at night and closing the door quietly behind them. I walked to my bedroom on unsteady feet. The small velvet box that had always sat on my dresser, right where my husband had left it the morning he died, was still there. But the weight was wrong when I lifted it. The rings were gone. Someone had opened it, taken them, closed it again neatly. My hands trembled, not from age this time, but from clarity. There were only a few people who had access to this house while I was in the hospital, recovering from the procedure. The nurses had called my sister Ruth when they needed someone to sign discharge papers. I remembered her perfume lingering on my coat when she brought it back. She'd said she only stopped by to water the plants, but the philodendron in the living room was dry as dead leaves. I sat on the edge of the bed, breathing slowly, letting the truth form. Someone had used my old documents, the ones from before marriage. Documents I hadn't touched in decades. Someone who knew where they were kept. Someone who knew I'd be too groggy to argue if a signature was shoved under my hand in a hospital bed. The house felt colder than usual. I listened to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a car passing the window, the ordinary world moving on while mine had shifted under my feet. My wedding rings weren't worth much money. The diamond was small, the gold plain, but to me, they were the only pieces of my husband I could still hold. And now they were gone, treated like items on a shelf in a second-hand store. I stood up and closed the little velvet box, not gently. I'd been quiet all my life, soft-spoken, accommodating, letting others push my decisions into corners until I barely recognized them as mine. But as I looked at that empty box, some old part of me I thought had died long ago stirred awake. Whoever had done this thought I would swallow it, sit down, stay silent. They were wrong. The house felt too quiet when I walked back into the living room, as if it were holding its breath with me. I stood there for a long moment, letting my eyes adjust to the dim afternoon light. Everything looked the same as I had left it before the surgery. The crocheted throw folded neatly over the armchair. My husband's old pipe resting on the bookshelf, though he hadn't touched it in more than a decade. The framed photographs on the mantel where his face still smiled, young and unburdened. But under all that sameness, I sensed something had shifted. Or maybe it was me who had shifted, and now I was seeing clearly for the first time in years. I walked to the desk by the window where I kept the documents that mattered. Birth certificate, marriage license, deed to the house. I opened the bottom drawer. The envelope with my maiden name documents should have been wedged in the back, under the tax folders. Instead, it lay on top, slightly off-center, as though someone had put it back in a hurry. I touched it and felt the faintest tremor run through me. Someone had sifted through these papers recently, someone who knew exactly what they needed. For a moment, anger burned hot in my chest, rising fast enough to make me dizzy. Then it cooled, settling into something quieter, steadier. Determination, maybe. I'd spent most of my life being talked over, talked around, talked into things for my own good. But this was theft. This was betrayal disguised as caretaking. I opened the envelope. My old driver's license was missing. So was one of the notarized name change documents from after my wedding. I'd kept them only out of habit, not importance, never imagining they'd become tools in someone else's hands. The absence was as sharp as a blade. The floor creaked in the hallway. For a second, my breath caught. But it was only the house settling. Still, it reminded me of the footsteps that had moved through here while I was unconscious in a hospital gown. I walked to the dresser in my bedroom, pulled open the top drawer, and reached into the far back corner where I'd once kept the rings for special occasions. Not just the wedding set, other small pieces too. A silver bracelet my husband bought me on our 25th anniversary. A locket from my mother. All gone. Only the cheap costume jewelry remained, the kind nobody would bother selling. I sat down on the edge of the bed again. My heart beat too loudly in the quiet room. I wasn't fragile. Never had been. But discovering that your life has been sifted through like a pawn shop shelf does something to you. It rearranges the air around you. Outside, a car slowed near my house. My sister Ruth's car had that same grumbling engine, the one she kept promising to fix. My pulse quickened in spite of myself. I half expected her to pull into the driveway and let herself in with the spare key she'd insisted I keep, just in case. But the car passed, and the moment folded away. I went to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and set it on the stove. The familiar scrape of metal on metal steadied me. While the water heated, I opened the drawer beside the refrigerator where I kept an old brown notebook. My husband had once joked that I wrote down everything like a detective, and maybe he'd been right. I kept dates, receipts, household repairs, visitors. Little things that meant nothing at the time, but told the truth later. I flipped back to the week of my surgery. In shaky handwriting, I had written, "Ruth has keys, says the houseplants will die if she doesn't check on them." But she hadn't watered anything, not one pot. How strange that she would remember the keys but forget the plants. The kettle began to hiss, a rising, impatient sound. I turned off the stove without making tea. My hands weren't steady enough to hold a cup anyway. I walked slowly from room to room, stopping in each doorway as if reacquainting myself with the life I had built. The hospital smell had faded from my coat, but lingered in my mind. I thought of the way the nurse had said, so gently, "Your sister stepped in to sign the forms, dear. You were still waking up." And I'd thanked her, grateful then, unaware of what was slipping through my fingers. On the dining table lay a stack of mail. I sifted through it absently until one envelope caught my eye. A pre-auction appraisal, addressed not to Eleanor Whitford, not to Eleanor Hartwell, the name I'd carried for half a century, but simply E. Whitford. Clean, crisp, unassuming, as if the life I'd lived since 22 had been erased. Something inside me settled then with the heaviness of a final decision. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't confusion or clerical error. It was deliberate. Someone had expected me to wake up from surgery half aware, sign whatever was placed in front of me, and later accept that things must have gotten misplaced. But I was awake now, fully awake. I closed the drawer, squared my shoulders, and looked around the house once more. They believed I wouldn't fight. They had no idea who I used to be, and who I was becoming again. I heard the familiar rattle of Ruth's car before I saw it. The uneven rhythm of her engine always announced her arrival a few seconds before she appeared at the door. I stood in the living room, arms folded loosely, watching the shadow of her figure move across the frosted glass. She didn't knock. She never knocked anymore. The spare key scraped in the lock, and then she came in with the same brisk confidence she used to have as a girl, except now it felt less like confidence and more like entitlement. "Oh, good, you're up," she said, shutting the door with her hip. "I thought you'd still be resting. You look a little pale." She leaned forward as if to kiss my cheek, but didn't bother finishing the gesture. "How was your day?" Her voice was too bright, too casual. And she didn't look at me. She looked around me, scanning the room as though checking whether anything was out of place since her last visit. I felt a small tightening in my chest, but I kept my face calm. "I lost some things," I said quietly. "Important things." Ruth stopped moving, just for a breath. Then she smiled, that small, quick smile she used whenever she was buying time. "Oh?" "Well, after surgery, it's normal to misplace things. Your mind's not fully back yet." "It's clear enough," I answered. "Clear enough to know my wedding rings didn't misplace themselves." The smile faltered, only for a heartbeat, but I saw it. She walked past me into the kitchen, pulling open cabinets, peering inside as though expecting to find the rings tucked between the tea tins. "I'm sure they'll turn up," she murmured. "You always put things in strange places. Remember the time you—" "Stop." I didn't raise my voice, but the word came out solid, like it had weight. Ruth froze with her hand on the cabinet door. Slowly, she turned to me, her expression slipping into mild irritation. "Eleanor, honestly, you're making too much of this. You've just had a procedure. You're not yourself." "I'm more myself than I've been in a long time," I replied. Her fingers drummed against the countertop. "Did someone call you? You look agitated." "The auction house called," I said. "They thanked me for selling my rings. They addressed me by my maiden name. They had my old documents. Someone gave them those." The silence that followed was thick, like dust settling after a box shatters on the floor. Ruth didn't blink at first. Her jaw tightened before she regained composure. "Well," she said, "that sounds like a mix-up. Bureaucracy gets messy sometimes. You shouldn't jump to conclusions." I walked closer, not fast, but steady. The documents were taken from my drawer, Someone used my name from before I ever married. Someone brought my rings to them. I haven't left this house in weeks except for the hospital. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Eleanor, you're tired. And frankly, you're making accusations you shouldn't. I came here to help you. I always help you. While you're recovering, someone has to make decisions. I didn't ask you to make decisions, I said. I asked you to water my plants, and you didn't even do that. A faint flush crept up her neck. Her eyes hardened. Is that what this is about? Plants? This is about someone walking through my home, I answered. Opening my drawers, taking my property, signing my name while I was sedated. Ruth exhaled sharply, shaking her head. If you think I stole from you, you're out of your mind. And you know Laura has the temporary medical proxy. Maybe she handled something and you misinterpreted it. My rings were sold, I repeated, letting each word land. You knew I was in the hospital. You had access to the house. You had access to my papers. And now you're very nervous. Her eyes finally met mine, sharp and defensive. You're being paranoid, and frankly, you're being ungrateful. I have my own life, but I drop everything to take care of you. You should appreciate that. I almost laughed. Not loudly, just a single breath that escaped like disbelief. You weren't taking care of me, Ruth. You were taking inventory. Ruth's mouth opened, but no words came out. Instead, she grabbed her purse, snapping the clasp shut so forcefully that the sound echoed in the small kitchen. I don't have to stand here and be insulted, she said. If you want to believe strangers over your own sister, that's your choice. But don't expect me to keep helping you. She strode toward the door, her heels clicking too sharply against the floor, each step louder than necessary. When she reached the threshold, she paused, not turning around. You need rest, she said coldly. You're confusing things that aren't real. They're real, I said softly, and I will find out everything. The door shut behind her with a heavy thud that made the picture frames on the wall tremble. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small after an argument. I didn't feel unsure or guilty. I felt awake, painfully awake, standing in the quiet she left behind. Someone had taken what was mine. Someone believed I wouldn't push back. They were mistaken. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. Not because I felt rested, I hardly slept at all, but because something inside me refused to stay still. The house was cold. The kind of cold that settles in when a truth has been spoken aloud and can no longer be ignored. I put on my robe, tied it tightly, and sat at the kitchen table with the hospital paperwork spread out before me. There, halfway down one of the forms, was the rushed, unbalanced signature that was supposed to be mine. It leaned too far to the right. The loop on the E was too wide. If someone had asked me a week ago whether anyone in my family would dare sign anything on my behalf without my permission, I would have said no. But now I knew better. I dialed the hospital's main line, listened to the automated menu, then finally reached a human voice, a receptionist who sounded friendly enough. I gave her my name, my date of birth, my admission date. Her tone softened, the way voices often do when speaking to someone elderly, but I didn't mind it this time. Courtesy is a kindness in a world that doesn't offer many. I need information, I said, about who requested the paperwork I signed after surgery, and who delivered the identification documents used on my behalf. One moment, Mrs. Hartwell, she said. Mrs. Hartwell, my real name, my rightful one. Hearing it steadied me. The line clicked faintly as she typed. Then, It shows here that your medical proxy provided the documents. A. Laura Kenton. Ring a bell? Laura. My niece. Not my daughter, not my caregiver, not anyone who had ever lifted more than a polite finger to help me. Yet in the hospital's records, she stood in the place where my husband once had and where my sister claimed to stand now. Did she bring them personally? I asked. Yes, the receptionist replied. Our staff verified everything at your bedside when she submitted the envelope. You were under sedation, so the nurse guided your signature to confirm the discharge and authorization forms. My throat tightened. I wasn't awake. Well, she said gently, you weren't fully unconscious either. It's common for patients to be foggy. You did hold the pen. Held the pen. The phrase felt like a mockery. Holding a pen isn't consent. Grasping something placed between your fingers isn't understanding. Could you send me copies of whatever she submitted? I asked. I need to see every document. Of course, I'll email them today. When I hung up, the silence settled again, but it felt different now. Sharp, precise, like the edge of a blade. I had names, I had actions, and I had proof that someone had used the hospital's trust as a tool. Before I could think further, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. My heart gave a small, startled jump. I walked to the door, hesitating before opening it. It wasn't Ruth. She never rang. It wasn't Laura. She would have texted first, pretending to be considerate. It was the mailman handing me a padded envelope. Special mail for you, Mrs. Hartwell, he said. Came marked urgent. I signed for it and closed the door. The envelope felt too light to carry anything important, yet something inside shifted when I tilted it. I sat down and opened it carefully. Inside was a letter from the auction house, the same one that had called me yesterday. They had enclosed a copy of the consignment agreement, the identification documents provided by E. Whitford, and a photo of the person who delivered the jewelry. My hands felt stiff as I unfolded the papers. The consignment agreement carried a signature that looked closer to mine than the hospital form. Someone had taken their time with this one. The curve of the H was almost right, but there was no softness in the downstroke. My writing always softens on the downstroke. I lifted the photocopied ID. It was my old driver's license, the one missing from my drawer. The picture showed a girl I barely recognized. Myself at 21, eyes full of hope. Someone had used my youth as a mask. Then I looked at the photo. Grainy, taken from behind the counter's security camera. A woman wearing a navy coat, mask covering most of her face, hair pulled into a tight bun. It wasn't a clear shot. Deliberately angled that way, I suspected. But the posture, the way the left shoulder sloped, the way the chin tilted slightly upward. I knew that stance. I had seen it at my door for decades. Ruth. Not certain, not proven, but unmistakable to me. I pressed the photo flat against the table and breathed slowly through my nose. If this had been any other crime, any stranger, perhaps I would have felt fear. But betrayal from your own blood numbs something inside you. It hardens the soft places that once believed people would choose love over convenience. My phone buzzed. I expected Ruth, but the caller ID said, Laura Kenton. I let it ring twice before answering. My voice was steady when I spoke, calmer than I felt. Hello, Laura. Her tone was sugary, too sweet for morning. Aunt Eleanor, I was just checking in. Mom said you seemed confused yesterday. Rough recovery, huh? Confused, I repeated softly. Is that what she said? Well, we were both worried. You know, after anesthesia, older patients sometimes... Older patients, I said, cutting through her sentence. Yes, I suppose older patients are easy to manage, easy to convince, easy to sign for. Silence. Then, I'm not sure what you mean. I think you do. A nervous laugh. Aunt Eleanor, you sound upset. Why don't I come over and— No, I said. Not today. Well, when works for you? When I'm ready. I hung up before she could answer. My hand was shaking slightly, but not from fear. From something long overdue. They had moved quietly, assuming the fog in my mind would protect them. But the fog had lifted, and now I could see everything clearly. The auction house was only a 20-minute drive from my home, but the ride felt longer. I kept both hands tight on the steering wheel, not because of nerves, but because I didn't trust myself to relax. Each red light gave me too much time to think. About the rings, about the forged documents, about the grainy photo showing a shape of a woman who moved like my sister. When I pulled into the parking lot, the building looked cleaner, brighter, more polished than I expected. Glass facade, brass handles, spotless windows. A place that did not belong to people like me. Quiet women who spent lifetimes making do, patching things, polishing old memories instead of chasing new ones. But today, I wasn't here to feel small. Inside, a young man in a gray suit approached with a smile too practiced to be sincere. Good morning. How may I help you? I'm Eleanor Hartwell, I said. Someone called me yesterday about the sale of my wedding rings. His expression shifted. Not alarm, not guilt, just professional alertness. Ah, yes. Miss Witt. Hartwell, right this way. He corrected himself mid-sentence, but I caught the slip. Everyone was using the wrong name because someone had handed them the wrong one. He led me to a small office with a polished desk and a single window overlooking a courtyard. He offered me a seat, then opened a folder already waiting there. I understand you believe there was a mistake. There was more than a mistake, I said. There was deception. He hesitated, then slid a document toward me. This is the signed authorization. It matches the identification we received. I looked at the signature. Too neat, too careful. Whoever forged it had taken time to imitate my hand, but didn't understand the small tremor I have in the tail of the H, the dip before the T. My handwriting carries age. No amount of copying can imitate 74 years of lived weight. That isn't mine, I said. He swallowed. If that is true, we take this very seriously. It is true. He reached for the second page in the folder. My old driver's license. 21-year-old me staring back with the kind of hope that would embarrass me now. Seeing that young face made something ache in my chest. That girl trusted the world. The woman I am now knows better. I haven't used that name in 5 decades, I said. Someone retrieved that license from my home and gave it to you. We were assured it was the correct identification, he murmured. I'm sure you were. I leaned back, watching him shift uncomfortably. The person who delivered the rings. Do you have footage? He nodded slowly. We sent you a still frame. The full video. Well, privacy rules are complicated. I held his gaze until he looked away. I need to see it, I said. After a long pause, he stood. Let me speak to my manager. When the door shut behind him, the room felt too quiet. My hands rested calmly on my lap, but inside, I felt something old and steady rising. The part of me that once handled my husband's estate, his bills, his medical forms, the part that learned to carry weight alone. That part of me wasn't frightened. It was angry, yes, but also sharp. The man returned with a woman in her 50s, hair pulled into a precise knot, eyes kind but assessing. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said, "I'm the general manager. I understand you're concerned about fraud." "I'm certain of it." She nodded and sat across from me. "We'll cooperate fully. We can't show you the full recording without a formal request from law enforcement or an attorney, but we can tell you this. The woman who brought in the rings used an appointment booked under the name Eleanor Whitford. She seemed very prepared. Prepared. That word chilled me more than anything else. Someone didn't panic. Someone planned. "Is there anything else you can tell me?" I asked. The manager hesitated, then spoke carefully. "The seller mentioned you were too overwhelmed after surgery to come yourself. She said she was handling things to spare you stress." My throat tightened. That phrasing. I knew exactly whose voice it echoed. My sister had said the same thing last year when she tried to convince me to let her manage my bank account. "You can't stress now, Eleanor. Let me handle things." The manager closed the folder. "Your rings have not yet been shipped to the buyer. The sale can be reversed if fraud is confirmed. We'll hold everything until you resolve this." I exhaled slowly, letting the tension leave my shoulders. "Thank you," I said. "I will resolve it." When I stepped back outside, the air felt colder. I reached my car and rested my hand on the door handle for a moment. Someone believed I would stay quiet. Someone believed I would be grateful for their interference. But they had forgotten one thing. Women like me survive by remembering everything. Laura opened the door before I had a chance to knock twice. She stood there with a smile stretched too wide, the kind people use when they're trying to hide irritation. Her hair was pulled into one of those sleek styles she favored. Tight, polished, suffocating. It suited her temperament. "Aunt Eleanor," she said brightly. "What a surprise! You should have called." I stepped inside without waiting for her invitation. Her smile flickered. The house was immaculate in that brittle way that suggested no one actually lived in it, only performed living for guests. Glass surfaces, chrome, white cushions, no sane person would let a child near. "I didn't come for tea," I said. "We need to talk." Laura followed me into the living room, her heels clicking too quickly. "Of course. Mom mentioned you've been overwhelmed. The anesthesia can make you imagine things." I sat down. She remained standing, as though height would give her advantage. "I went to the auction house," I said. "They kept the rings. They also gave me the documents you submitted." The color drained slightly from her face, but she recovered fast. Too fast. "Submitted? Aunt Eleanor, I think you're confusing something." "I never—" "You gave the hospital my old identification," I said. "You had temporary proxy. You brought papers to my bedside while I was sedated. You told the staff you were helping me." Laura blinked, lashes stiff with mascara. "Well, yes, but only what they needed. They said you weren't fully awake, and someone had to—" "No one had to sell my rings." Her mouth opened, then closed again. She looked away, studying a decorative bowl on her perfectly polished table. "I don't know anything about a sale." "Someone used my maiden name?" I said. "Someone brought the rings themselves. Someone prepared fake signatures. Someone walked into my house while I wasn't here." She crossed her arms, her tone sharpening. "Are you accusing me?" "I'm asking you." Laura let out a short, humorless laugh. "This is ridiculous. You're upset, I understand. But I've been helping you. I've handled your appointments, your prescriptions. You handled access," I corrected. "Not help." Her eyes narrowed. "Mom said you were always dramatic after surgery. Maybe you should rest before you start pointing fingers. I leaned forward slightly. I saw the photo. That pierced her composure. Her jaw tightened. Photo? The one from the auction house's security camera. It isn't clear, but I recognize the posture, the coat, the way the shoulder tilts. It looks like your mother. Laura's lips thinned. Mom would never. If she didn't, then someone else did. But someone had the keys. Someone had my documents. Someone knew I wouldn't be conscious enough to object. I held her gaze. Someone expected me to trust them. Laura turned away, pacing now. Why would we bother? Your things aren't worth much. I let the insult land exactly as intended, but I didn't react. My rings weren't valuable to you, I said, but they were valuable to me. Silence thickened the room. Then Laura spoke, too calmly. Maybe there's a misunderstanding. Maybe you misplaced something. You're alone a lot. It happens. No, I said, not this time. She exhaled sharply, irritation replacing pretense. Well, what exactly do you want from me? Honesty. That's unreasonable, she snapped, and then seemed to hear her own words because she immediately softened her tone. I mean, I can't give you answers I don't have. I stood. You can give me access to the documents you handled, every form, every envelope, every message between you and the hospital. I took a step toward the door. I'll be requesting them formally anyway. Her eyes widened with something very close to fear before she masked it again. Aunt Eleanor, you're overreacting. This could turn into a mess. It already has. And if you keep stirring things, she said, her voice trembling at the edges, you're going to ruin relationships. I paused at the doorway. Laura, I said softly, relationships don't break when the truth is spoken. They break when someone starts stealing from family because they assume no one will notice. She didn't answer. She just stared at me, breathing too fast, fingers twisting the edge of her blouse. I opened the door. I'll be in touch, I said. When it shut behind me, I felt the cold morning air settle around my shoulders like a cloak. Heavy, yes, but strengthening. They thought I would back down. They still didn't understand. I was just beginning. The next morning, I drove to Mr. Hale's office. The building hadn't changed in years. The same chipped brickwork, the same uneven steps that George used to complain about every time he visited. A wooden sign by the door still read, Hale and Associates, though I doubted there were any associates left. It was just him now, somewhere in his 70s, still working because he believed people like me needed someone on their side. Inside, the reception area smelled faintly of paper and old carpeting. When I gave my name, the secretary brightened. He'll be pleased to see you, Mrs. Hartwell. It's been too long. I almost said that too many people had said that lately, as if absence were a natural thing rather than a warning sign. Instead, I nodded and followed her down the hall. She pushed open the door and Mr. Hale rose slowly from his chair. Eleanor, he said warmly, extending his hand. You look tired, but sharper than ever. I took the seat across from him. His office was cluttered in a comforting way. Papers stacked like leaning towers, books left open as though mid-conversation. Nothing deceitful could survive in a room like this. I need help, I said. No tremor in my voice. Just truth. He folded his hands. Tell me everything. I did. From the hospital signature to the missing documents, from the auction call to the photo, that wasn't clear but clear enough for me. He didn't interrupt once, not with questions, not with disbelief. He simply listened, the way people rarely do. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. This wasn't an impulsive act, Eleanor. This was prepared. Someone knew exactly how to exploit a medical proxy and an old set of documents. I know. And you believe your sister or niece might be involved? I believe someone with access to my home was involved, I said. They had keys, they had opportunity, and they assumed anesthesia would cloud my memory. He nodded. It does, in most people. But not in me, I said. Not this time. He leaned back, eyes thoughtful. You're doing the right thing by coming here. We'll start by requesting all hospital documentation, including logs of who accessed your records. Then we'll submit a formal inquiry to the auction house for the security footage. They'll release it once they see an attorney involved. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief exactly, but alignment. Like a hinge finally settling into place. And the documents stolen from my home? I asked. We'll file a notice of suspected identity fraud. That forces the bank, the hospital, and the auction house to freeze any transactions involving your old identification. So they can't take anything else, I said softly. Exactly. He made notes. His handwriting was slow but steady, stronger than mine had been lately. When he finished, he looked at me with an expression that was neither pity nor surprise, just understanding. You've been living too quietly, Eleanor, he said. Quiet people are the easiest to steal from because everyone assumes they won't make noise. A faint smile pulled at my lips. I suppose this is me making noise. Well, he said, you're doing it at the right volume. I reached into my bag and placed the documents from the auction house on his desk. He studied them carefully, tapping his finger next to the copied signature. This is forgery, he said. Competent, but still forgery. I thought so. He pointed at something else, a date. This form was signed the same morning you were discharged. You were still under sedation. Yes, I said. I remember the nurse saying someone brought paperwork. I could barely open my eyes. And they took advantage, he murmured. Whoever did this expected you to forget. They expected you to be confused. They expected you to be grateful someone helped. I was silent a moment. Then I said, they expected me to be small. He looked up sharply. And are you? No, I said. Not anymore. He nodded, as if that was exactly what he needed to hear. Good. Because once this begins, there's no stepping back. People won't like being exposed. People shouldn't steal if they fear exposure. He smiled. You sound like George. The name struck something tender in me, but in a steady way, like a memory standing up straighter. When the meeting ended, he handed me copies of the forms he'd prepared. I'll file everything today. You'll hear from me by tomorrow. I stood, gathering my things. Thank you, I said, for believing me. I've known you a long time, Eleanor. His gaze was kind but firm. You don't misunderstand things. You observe them. As I stepped out into the crisp air, I felt something anchoring inside me. Not bitterness, not revenge, just truth taking its rightful place. And once truth arrives, it doesn't leave quietly. The bank was quiet when I walked in, the kind of quiet that reminds you money moves silently, without emotion, without loyalty. I took a number and waited near the far wall, watching customers fidget with pens, tap their phones, glance at their watches. Everyone looked hurried. Everyone looked younger than I felt. When my number was called, I approached the counter where a young man with a neat beard greeted me with the polite cheerfulness they train into bank employees. How can I help you today, Mrs. Hartwell? I need to review all recent activity on my accounts, I said. Especially the week I was in the hospital. He typed quickly, the clicking of keys sharp in the quiet space. Of course. One moment. His eyebrows pulled together. There were several small withdrawals, authorized under your proxy. My proxy lasted only during medical decision-making, I said. Not financial. Well, he murmured, scrolling. It appears someone used a secondary authorization. Temporary access. It was entered the day before your procedure. My stomach tightened. Entered by whom? He hesitated. A relative. A Ms. Kenton. Laura again. Always Laura, holding the pen where she had no right to. Show me the transactions, I said. He printed a sheet, rows of numbers, deceptively tidy. $40 here, $60 there, $100 at a pharmacy. Nothing large enough to raise suspicion. No one steals openly when they believe you won't wake up enough to count. These were cash withdrawals? I asked. Yes, he said. Frequent, but small. Most people don't notice these. I noticed. The man looked up at me with a flicker of something like respect. Would you like us to freeze all third-party access? Immediately? Yes, I said. Do it now. As he typed the restrictions into place, I felt an unexpected steadiness settle inside me. One lock clicked shut. One door closed. If someone intended to dismantle my life piece by piece, they would have to do it without using my accounts ever again. Do you want text alerts for any attempted access? He asked. Yes, I said. Every attempt. He nodded and printed the confirmation. It's done. Only you can withdraw funds now. Thank you, I said. My voice was calm, even though a tremor of anger still rustled beneath my ribs like wind through dry leaves. Outside, the air felt thinner. I walked to my car slowly, purposefully, letting each step settle. When I opened the door, my phone buzzed. A notification from the bank. Unauthorized access attempt blocked. 12:43 p.m. I stared at the screen. Someone had tried to use my accounts the very minute they realized the window was closing. I didn't need to guess who. Desperation has a signature, just like handwriting does. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, breathing deeply. I wasn't frightened. Not anymore. What I felt was something colder, cleaner, the quiet that comes when illusions finally crack. Before turning the key, I whispered aloud, "You should have moved faster." The car engine started with a steady hum. The road stretched ahead of me, familiar but somehow sharper. I wasn't done. This was only the first knot I intended to untie. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I wouldn't defend myself. They should have known better. It was late afternoon when Reed showed up at my door. I wasn't expecting him. I wasn't expecting anyone, for that matter. The sun was already lowering, stretching long shadows across my living room, turning everything a shade more solemn than it needed to be. When I opened the door, Reed stood there shifting from foot to foot, his hands buried in the pockets of his jacket. He looked younger than ever, not in age, but in the way a person looks when they're carrying something heavy and don't know how to set it down. "Aunt Eleanor," he said, voice low. "Can I come in?" I nodded and stepped aside. He walked in cautiously, as though afraid something inside might break. Or maybe he was afraid to break the calm he thought he'd find here. Calm was not what lived in my house these days. He followed me to the kitchen, where I gestured toward a chair. He sat, but didn't lean back. His posture was tight, like a bowstring drawn too long. He looked around the room, at the empty ring box on the counter, at the stack of papers from the bank, at the pen I'd left uncapped. His eyes lingered just long enough to show he understood more than he should. "Aunt Eleanor," he said again, quieter this time. Mom and Grandma have been talking. I folded my hands. I can imagine. He shook his head. Not the way you think. They're talking about you, about what you're planning, about how you're being difficult. He swallowed. They think you won't let this go. I won't. He nodded, as if he already knew that. Grandma's furious. I've never seen her like this. She's been on the phone all morning, arguing with Mom, trying to figure out what you know. He hesitated. She said something about the auction house. I didn't speak. I wanted him to keep going, to say the thing he'd come here to say. He took a breath. I heard them talking last night. They thought I was upstairs. Grandma said you'll ruin everything if you keep digging. Mom told her to calm down and said you're too confused to pull anything together. His jaw tightened. They're acting guilty. Really guilty. I watched him carefully. Reed had always been different, quiet, observant, kind in the ways that matter. He saw people more clearly than they wanted to be seen. It was his kindness that made this conversation possible. You didn't come here just to warn me, I said. What else did you hear? He lowered his head. Mom said you'd never notice the small stuff because you don't check your accounts. She said the rings weren't worth much anyway, and that you probably wouldn't even remember having them. My breath stilled in my chest. Even though I'd already suspected her involvement, hearing it spoken aloud made the truth feel heavier, more final. And Grandma? I asked softly. Reed hesitated. She said it's better to handle your things now, instead of waiting. She said you'd understand eventually. Understand. People who take from the vulnerable always use that word, as if betrayal is something small, like forgetting to return a borrowed book. I leaned back slowly, letting his words settle into place. They didn't surprise me, but they confirmed what I needed to know. This wasn't a single bad decision. It was a plan, rehearsed in whispers, polished by justification. Reed's voice trembled slightly. I'm sorry, Aunt Eleanor. I didn't know what to do. I thought you deserved to know. You did the right thing, I said. He let out a breath, shaky, relieved. What are you going to do now? I looked at him, at the worry in his eyes, at the earnest fear. He wasn't on their side, not truly. And he wasn't on mine because he wanted anything from me. He was here because conscience led him to my doorstep. I'm going to protect what's mine, I said quietly. And I'm going to make sure no one uses me again. He nodded. If you need help, anything. I reached out and touched his hand lightly. One day I might, but not today. When he left, the house felt less empty than before, not warmer. Warmth wasn't what I needed now, but clearer, like a window wiped clean. Someone in my family still remembered right from wrong, and the ones who didn't were about to face someone they underestimated. Ruth called before sunset, her voice clipped and sharp, the way it always became when she sensed she was losing control of a situation. I let it ring twice before answering. I wanted her to feel the distance, the space she had carved herself. Eleanor, she said, not bothering with pleasantries. We need to talk. Yes, I replied. We do. I'm coming over. It wasn't a question. It never had been. I'll unlock the door, I said, though I made no move to do so. If she wanted to walk in as if she owned the place, she could do it the way she always did, pretending it was her right. When she arrived, she didn't knock. She walked straight in, her coat still on, her face stiff with something between annoyance and panic. She looked at me as though searching for the old version of myself, the compliant one, the quiet one. She didn't find her. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Calling lawyers, stirring up trouble, making the bank freeze things? Do you understand how that makes us look?" "I'm not concerned about appearances," I said. "I'm concerned about the truth." Ruth dropped her purse onto the chair with a heavy thud. "You're overreacting, acting like we're criminals. You're taking this too far." "I'm taking it far enough." She crossed the room in 3 quick steps. Her movements were jerky, uncoordinated, not the calm, collected Ruth she liked the world to believe in. "We were trying to help you," she said. "You're getting older. Things are slipping. You can't handle everything alone." "I handled everything alone long before you decided I needed supervision," I said. Her nostrils flared. "This is exactly what I mean. You're being defensive." I looked at her calmly. "My wedding rings were stolen. My accounts were accessed. My documents were taken. Is it defensive to ask why?" She recoiled slightly, as if the list itself had weight. "You don't have proof of anything." "Not yet." Her eyes flickered. A flash of fear quickly smothered by indignation. "You're going to tear this family apart, all because you're imagining threats where there are none." I shook my head. "I'm not imagining anything, Ruth. But you've been imagining I wouldn't notice. That's the mistake." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Eleanor, drop this. If you push, things will get ugly." "They're already ugly," I said softly. "You just didn't expect to be seen." For a moment, neither of us moved. Her face twitched. The kind of small, involuntary tremor that comes from holding too many lies too tightly. Then she sank into the chair opposite me, rubbing her temples. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "We're your family." Family. That word had been stretching thin for a long time. Now it snapped without sound. "I trusted you," I said. "And you walked through my life as though it were yours to rearrange." Ruth's eyes shone in a way that wasn't quite remorse, more like fear of consequences. "You don't know everything," she murmured. "Then you can tell me." But she didn't. She looked away, jaw tightening, throat bobbing with unspoken excuses. When she finally stood to leave, she avoided my gaze. "You're making a mistake," she said, voice brittle. "And when this blows back on you, don't expect sympathy." I opened the door for her, something she hadn't expected. She blinked, startled, as if I'd changed the script she'd written for us long ago. "I'm not looking for sympathy," I said. "I'm looking for justice." She stepped outside without another word. When the door closed behind her, the house felt heavier. Not with sorrow, but with truth settling into its rightful place. Ruth had shown more in what she refused to say than in what she admitted. The cracks were widening, and soon, everything hidden would have to face the light. By the next morning, the air in my house felt different. Not lighter, not cleaner, but charged, as though the walls themselves were waiting for the next step. I didn't keep them waiting. I took the folder Mr. Hale had given me and drove straight to his office again, not bothering to call ahead. Some things require presence, not appointments. He greeted me with the same steady nod as before. "Eleanor, I was just about to phone you. Come in." I sat down, placing the folder on his desk. "I need to move forward," I said. No hesitation, no caution. A faint smile tugged at his mouth. "I suspected you'd say that." He opened a drawer and pulled out a stack of new documents. Forms with highlighted sections, attached letters, formal inquiries. I filed the fraud notifications yesterday afternoon. Overnight, we already received responses from 2 institutions. My pulse quickened, though my face stayed calm. What kind of responses? Confirmations of irregular activity, he said. The hospital admits your medical proxy was used beyond its intended scope. The bank flagged the attempted access yesterday, and the auction house has officially paused the transaction pending verification. I exhaled slowly. Good. He tapped the folder. We'll escalate today. The next step is requesting full access logs. Who opened your medical file? Who accessed your financial profile? Who signed you out of the hospital? All of that leaves digital fingerprints, even when people believe they're acting quietly. Let them leave fingerprints, I murmured. They were careless. They underestimated me. As people often do, he said gently. He slid a consent form across the desk. This authorizes me to act on your behalf for all legal retrievals. It doesn't give me power over your property, only over communication and documentation. I signed without hesitation. My handwriting looked steadier than it had in months. There's more, he added. The auction house manager emailed early this morning. She said the camera footage, the full version, shows the seller speaking to the clerk. The audio is weak, but they picked up a few words. My breath caught. Whose voice? It's not clear, he said. But one phrase was distinct. She won't notice. She's sedated. The room felt very still. That's enough for me, I said. He nodded. Enough for law enforcement, too, once we finish compiling the evidence. But I want to proceed carefully. Not for their sake, for yours. These cases can get emotional when family is involved. I met his gaze. Emotion isn't what brought me here. Reality did. He leaned back, eyes warm with respect. You're stronger than they remember. They preferred me when I was quiet. They preferred you manageable, he corrected. I looked down at the folder between us. My life reduced to documents, signatures, timestamps. But for the first time in years, seeing it all laid out didn't make me feel small. It made me feel anchored. What should I do next? I asked. For now, nothing. Let me handle the institutions. He paused. But you should prepare yourself. People who have something to hide often get bold when they sense the ground shifting. Ruth already came by, I said. She's losing composure. And the niece? She's pretending nothing happened. But she's frightened, too. He nodded thoughtfully. Good. Fear means truth is getting close. I stood, smoothing the front of my coat. Mr. Hale, thank you. Not just for helping, but for treating this seriously. It is serious, he said. Someone tried to erase your consent, your identity, your autonomy. That is never small. I walked to the door slowly, feeling the weight of his words settle into my spine like a steel rod. Outside, the morning was overcast, but bright in a muted way, as if the sky hadn't decided whether it wanted to break open or clear. I stepped toward my car with steady footing. I wasn't afraid of the truth. I wasn't afraid of the fight. What frightened me was only one thing: how long I had lived believing silence was safety. Not anymore. The auction house called just after noon while I was pouring myself a cup of tea I didn't really want. The manager's voice was polite, formal, but I caught something else beneath it. A hint of unease. People grow uneasy when they realize they've been part of someone else's wrongdoing. Mrs. Hartwell, she said, I wanted to inform you personally. The rings have been removed from the shipping queue. They're still in our safe. You may retrieve them whenever you're ready. A warmth rose in my chest, but it wasn't joy. It was something more like vindication, quiet and steady. "I'll be there this afternoon," I said. When I arrived, they led me to a back office. The room was small, windowless, lined with tall, gray filing cabinets. The manager placed a black velvet pouch on the desk between us. She didn't open it. She waited for me to do it myself, as though she knew this wasn't a moment to intrude upon. My hands shook slightly as I loosened the drawstring. Inside, I felt the rings before I saw them. The familiar curve of the gold band, smooth from decades of wear, and the engagement ring with its modest diamond that never pretended to be more than it was. I lifted them into the light. For a moment, I couldn't speak. They weren't worth much on paper. But in that room, beneath the flat fluorescent lights, they carried every Sunday morning my husband and I spent reading side by side. Every holiday meal, every small quarrel, every making up afterward. They carried a life, my life, something no thief could ever price correctly. "They're intact," the manager said softly. "No damage." I nodded. "Thank you." She hesitated before adding, "We've reviewed the footage again. We can't release it until your attorney's request is processed, but the woman who brought these in seemed familiar with your history. She spoke as though she knew you well." "I expected as much," I said. "We'll cooperate fully," she promised. "Whatever you decide to pursue." I slipped the rings into my coat pocket, feeling their weight settle against my palm. That weight grounded me more than any reassurance could. Outside, the air felt warmer than earlier. Or maybe that warmth was just me breathing easier for the first time in days. Still, the moment wasn't triumphant. It was sobering. Getting something back doesn't erase the fact that someone took it. On the drive home, I didn't turn on the radio. I wanted the silence. I wanted to hear my own thoughts without interference. The rings kept shifting lightly in my pocket with each turn. A small reminder that the world had tried to take pieces of me, and I had taken them back. When I reached the house, I went straight to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time since surgery, I opened the velvet ring box. The one that had sat untouched on my dresser, hiding its emptiness like a wound. This time, when I placed the rings inside, the click of the lid closing felt different. Final, but not in a way that closed me off. Final in a way that opened something else. A place where strength could grow. My phone buzzed then. A message from Mr. Hale. Footage request approved. Documents incoming. Keep steady. They're running out of room. I stared at the words for a long moment. Running out of room. Yes, they were. I touched the ring box gently, not with grief, but with clarity. They had counted on me forgetting. They had counted on me retreating. But I was done retreating. And now I had my most symbolic proof, returned intact, and no longer theirs to touch. Laura showed up first. She didn't call. She never did when she felt cornered. Her car screeched slightly as she braked in my driveway, a small giveaway of nerves. When I opened the door, she was already halfway up the steps, lips pressed into a tight line, hands shoved into the pockets of her coat, as if hiding them might hide everything else. "Aunt Eleanor," she said, breathless, "we need to clear the air." "The air is very clear," I replied. "That's the problem for you, I imagine." She flinched, but only briefly. "Mom said you got the rings back. That's good, right? So maybe we can put all this confusion behind us." I stepped aside, nodding her in. "If you want to talk, come talk." She walked into my living room and stopped short, seeing the folders on my table. The bank statements, the hospital logs, the message from Mr. Hale. Her jaw tightened. You're escalating this? She said quietly. You're involving lawyers? I didn't escalate anything, I said. I responded. She let out a strained laugh. You're acting like we stole thousands from you. You stole from me at a moment I couldn't defend myself, I said. The amount doesn't lessen the betrayal. Her eyes flashed, panic flickering beneath indignation. Mom didn't mean for things to go this far. She just... Your mother walked into my house and helped herself to my documents. Someone sold my rings. Someone accessed my accounts. If that wasn't her, then it was you. If it wasn't you, then she taught you how. I paused. Which version would you like me to believe? Laura swallowed hard. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with all the things she knew she couldn't deny. Before she could answer, the door opened again. Ruth stepped inside, as if the house still belonged to her. No greeting, no hesitation. Just a gust of cold air and fury carried in behind her. I told you not to talk to her alone, she snapped at Laura. Then she turned to me. What are you doing? Reclaiming my life, I said. Ruth's eyes darted to the documents on the table. Something like fear flickered, then hardened into anger. You're going to ruin everything. You're going to make a spectacle out of nothing. Those rings weren't worth anything. Why are you acting like we murdered someone? Because you took what wasn't yours, I said calmly. And you expected me to stay quiet. Ruth's voice rose. We were trying to help you. You're getting old, Eleanor. You forget things. You're vulnerable. Someone had to step in. I didn't ask for intervention, I said. I asked for respect. You're being dramatic, she snapped. Not at all, I said. Dramatic would have been calling the police before speaking to either of you. I chose dignity instead. Laura looked down. Her hands were shaking. I wondered if she was realizing for the first time how deep into this she'd followed her mother. I turned toward her. Laura, did you sell my rings? She didn't answer. Did you sign forms using my old name? Nothing. Did you take money from my account? Her shoulders tightened, her breath hitched. Then Ruth stepped between us. Stop interrogating her. If you want someone to blame, blame me. Laura's head jerked up, startled. She hadn't expected her mother to admit anything. And what exactly should I blame you for? I asked. Ruth opened her mouth, then closed it. That was answer enough. At last, she said softly, you shouldn't live alone anymore. You shouldn't manage things anymore. We were trying to prepare before something happened. Something did happen, I said. But not to me. They both stared. It happened to your conscience, I continued, though it seems that was a long decline. Laura's eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink away. Ruth stood rigid, refusing to break. I'm done speaking for now, I said. Mr. Hale will contact you both. Any further communication should go through him. You do that to family? Ruth whispered. I didn't do anything, I said. You did. I'm simply refusing to carry the weight of your choices. For a moment, no one moved. Then Laura turned and walked out, silently, shoulders trembling. Ruth followed her, but not before casting one last hollow look in my direction. Not hatred, not sorrow. Just the stunned recognition that the version of me she manipulated for years was gone. When the door closed behind them, the quiet was immense. But it wasn't heavy. It was clean. What needed to be said had been said, and what needed to break had finally broken. The house felt different after they left. Not safer, not warmer. Just mine again, in a way it hadn't been for a long time. I locked the door, turned the deadbolt slowly, deliberately, the metal sliding into place like a promise kept. Then I walked through each room, not to check for anything missing, but to reclaim the space with my eyes, to remind myself that every book, every photograph, every chair was chosen by me, carried by me, kept by me. No one had the right to rearrange my life while I was unconscious. By evening, the sky outside had shifted into that pale blue that comes right before dusk. I sat at the dining table with a blank notepad in front of me. It had been years since I wrote anything longer than a grocery list, but today required more. I wrote down 3 words at the top of the page. What comes next? Mr. Hale had warned me. Once this process began, it would continue gathering weight, gathering speed. People scramble when the walls close in. They fight, they plead, they lie, they play innocent. I had already seen the early cracks, the frantic calls, the forced smiles, the accusations thrown like stones that crumble before they land. But there were decisions I needed to make on my own, quietly, without emotion clouding the ink. I opened the folder he'd given me. Inside were forms relating to estate planning, power of attorney, asset control, documents most people postpone until the last chapter of their lives. But I'd learned something these past days. Waiting invites intrusion. Silence invites presumption. I took a deep breath and began making notes. The house, the accounts, the personal items that carried meaning only for me, and the question of who should inherit anything after me. For years, out of habit more than affection, I had assumed it would be family. That's what people do. They leave things to the branches nearest their trunk. But branches can rot without you noticing. Sometimes the closest growth is the one that bends toward the darkest place. I thought of Ruth's voice, cold, clipped, shaking with fear disguised as authority. I thought of Laura's posture, stiff, guilty, desperate to preserve her own comforts. And then I thought of Reed, a boy who had nothing to gain from warning me. A young man who stood in the doorway of my kitchen with the truth trembling in his hands because he knew it mattered. A person who didn't come to take but to give. Honesty, loyalty, decency. Rare gifts. Rarer still when given freely. I wrote his name. Just his. The room felt still after that. Not solemn, not heavy. Simply right. I pulled open the drawer of the desk and took out my old will. It had been written when George was alive, when the world was different, when I couldn't yet imagine being betrayed by the very people who claimed to take care of me. I placed it beside the new documents and felt no sentimentality. Some papers outlive their purpose. The clock ticked loudly in the quiet. Outside, a dog barked in the distance. Then silence reclaimed the street. My phone buzzed. A message from Mr. Hale. Hospital logs received. Access by Kenton confirmed. Call me tomorrow. Confirmed. The words sat in my mind like a stone dropping into a still pond. Not surprising, not emotional, just final. I closed the folder and rested my hand on top of it. For the first time since waking from surgery, I felt myself breathe fully, all the way to the bottom of my lungs. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't punishment. This was restoration, of dignity, of truth, of control over a life I had spent decades tending carefully, only for others to assume they could pocket it one piece at a time. I turned off the lights and walked toward the bedroom. The hallway seemed longer, quieter, but the quiet didn't frighten me anymore. It finally sounded like freedom. I woke before sunrise, not because of worry this time, but because something in me had settled in the night, a stillness that wasn't numbness, but clarity. The kind that comes after a storm has taken everything loose and left only what's rooted deeply enough to stay. I made tea, opened the curtains, and watched the pale morning light stretch across the yard. The world looked simple again. Not repaired, not yet, but simple. The ring box lay on the table where I'd left it. I opened it slowly, letting the hinges creak in the quiet. The rings caught the faint sunlight, and for the first time since all this began, they didn't make me ache. They made me straighten. Mr. Hale arrived at 9 sharp. He let himself in after I called out for him to come through. He didn't comment on the new locks I'd installed. He only nodded once, approvingly. We sat at the dining table, and he spread the documents before me like a map of everything that had gone wrong and everything we had put back in place. "It's done," he said. "All access under your old identification has been frozen. Fraud markers are active. The investigation will proceed formally now. You won't have to do anything more." I nodded. "Good. And your estate?" he asked gently. "Updated," I said. "Signed this morning." He didn't look surprised. He'd seen the cracks in my family long before I had allowed myself to acknowledge them. He knew the shape of betrayal better than I did. "Reed?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "He's the only one who treated me like a person, not a vault." Mr. Hale gathered the papers, slid them back into his folder, and leaned back. "Then you've protected yourself, and you've protected what matters." There was no triumph in his voice, just respect. After he left, I walked outside. The day had warmed slightly, the air holding the faint scent of early spring. I sat on the porch steps, the ones George always meant to fix, and let the sunlight soak into my hands. My joints ached, as they always do. But the ache felt honest. Not like the ache of mistrust, or the ache of being treated like a fading shadow in my own life. People think getting older means becoming weaker. That age turns you into someone who needs managing, guiding, handling. But age also gives you something else. A long memory, a sharp sense of what is real, a quiet strength that doesn't need to announce itself. For years, I'd tried to keep peace by staying silent. Now I understood. Silence isn't peace. Silence is an invitation for someone else to speak over you, carve out your life, and claim they're doing you a favor. I won't be silent anymore. Later that afternoon, Reed stopped by. He didn't text first. He just appeared at the gate, awkward and earnest, holding a grocery bag he pretended was important. I opened the door before he knocked. "I brought you some things," he said. "Just basics." I smiled. "Thank you. Come in, dear." He stepped into the kitchen, looking around as though expecting more tension in the air. But the house felt steady. He felt it too. I could see it in the way his shoulders dropped. "Mom and Grandma are upset," he said carefully. "They will recover," I answered. He nodded slowly. "I just wanted to check on you. Make sure you're okay." "I am," I said. "Truly." He didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. He simply sat with me, talking about nothing urgent, his classes, his plans, a girl he might be falling in love with. His voice filled the house in a gentle way, the kind of presence that doesn't demand anything, doesn't expect anything, doesn't take anything. When he left, I walked him to the door. He looked at me with that soft concern only the young have, the kind that assumes you're more breakable than you truly are. "You're stronger than they think," he said quietly. "So are you," I replied. After he drove off, I stood at the window and watched the street settle back into its quiet rhythm. Children rode bicycles. A neighbor watered her plants. A dog barked at nothing. Ordinary moments, but they felt like mine again. I sat down at my table, opened the ring box, and touched the bands lightly. Not to grieve, but to remember what dignity feels like when you reclaim it with your own hands. If someone reading this is where I was, quiet, overlooked, underestimated, don't wait for others to give your life back to you. Take it, steady, calmly, without apology. And if this story reached you, then listen to me, from one woman who has lived long enough to earn her truth. Share this. Tell it. Let someone else find their strength sooner than I did. No one has the right to decide your worth for you.